No, I want to say all this. It was my post over on Similar Worlds, which it's cross posted with, but I want to actually say these things out loud. I want women voting. I support the women's right to vote in a big way, and I wanted to say all this and all the reasons why I've come to this conclusion, and because of the fact I'm astonished that this is even a controversial matter on this platform, but unfortunately, the internet being what it is, there's a lot of creepiness going on. Despite my utter contempt for TERFs and for the trans exclusionary radical feminist, for those that are unfamiliar with the terms, I'm very strongly against Paul Elam, the MRA, and the MGTOW of this, particular platform. And I wanted to say my piece about this. Some of these guys are so far gone that they're questioning whether, the amendments that even allowed women the vote in the first place should not be repealed. And I believe that they shouldn't be repealed, and so I wanted to issue my apology around this particular topic. I don't see things the way that Elam, as in Paul Elam, did at all. I needed help from the government at one point, and I'm trying to break that need because I'm well aware that the trust fund and its solvency issues that are coming up the pike and unlikely to be resolved because Republican voters would have to die off far quicker for it to really get fixed. And I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it happens to strictly speaking be true. But the thing that Elam and others gave us this whole notion with the slogan. The slogan was like women want equal rights, but equal rights mean responsibilities, and they don't have any. And it's just I'm such a computer guy as it is already that I know what variables and abstract thinking and like are and how organizations like the Satanic Temple, in a way, were only trying to take advantage of the law to make the religious right have to rethink what they were doing and to our nation's laws by making them result in all kinds of things that they never intended them to do. And it's like Elam may not intend for his words or his arguments to have that rights ought to have associated responsibilities to be used against men, but it's too easy to foresee that his own arguments being basically picked up and repackaged and used against a way that damages us as a cohort. So I find that his movement isn't actually beneficial to men either at the end of the day because of this. And in fact, I stand in solidarity with the feminist in this, although that's kind of a metaphor. Obviously, I'm sitting, on my knee. I'm sitting right now, but allow me to demonstrate how this works in rhetoric and how easily that this could turn into a disaster for us. Women want equal rights, but they don't want equal responsibilities. Becomes certain men want equal rights, but they don't want equal responsibilities. That's all you do. You just and then, all you need to understand is that it's X want equal rights, but they don't want equal responsibilities, with X being a variable where you can put anything in the X position, and now it's just a formula. Your rhetoric has been repackaged and, used to take the right to vote away from certain men, who don't have the same responsibilities that other men do. And now it's easy to show that some men want the same responsibilities. Not every man is a taxpayer in our society, and yet all men can vote provided they're registered. Some men don't work for the same jobs as others. For years, I was just awarded the state. I didn't even have my own company as I do now. So all I did was siphon off taxpayer money, and yet I could still vote. And that's just how long, and that's just it. How long before some chud comes along and figures out that they could suggest linking military service to the right to vote, and say that only people who had served should have the civil liberty that is the right to vote. And in fact, I believe that they already have done exactly this. Once you take women's rights to vote away, it becomes a lot easier to start thinking about taking still other groups of people's rights to vote away. And it can very easily turn into a spiral that will not end until only the smallest sliver of society has these civil rights. And so I say that women should have the right to vote, even if they don't have the same responsibilities as tax-paying men. I've learned my history well enough to be alarmed by this sort of rhetoric. First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. a quote from World War II's Martin Niemöller, whose name I am probably completely butchering. It's what the assholes in power truly fear: unity, solidarity to my female comrades here and women of the world. The point here is that Paul Elam has not thought about the fire that he's playing with deeply enough. If you use his logic, it won't be long before someone comes along and publicly declares that you should have to earn the right to vote by spending 2 years serving in the military. Once you start down the road of taking certain parties' votes to write votes away, it can become a very slippery slope that turns into something that you never intended. And I don't mean to accuse Paul Elam of wanting to go down that slippery slope. That's not my point. My point here is that Paul Elam may find himself, in his wish for women to lose the right to vote in a world that he doesn't want to live in, and he should be very careful about the things that he wishes for, because somebody else will be more than happy to articulate those positions, that were mostly inspired by him and in response to him. And we seem to live in a society where that kind of backwards thinking is actually popular politically, which is the bigger nightmare that I find myself, having to contend with and to think about, because it isn't, it wouldn't be the first time that I've encountered the kind of mentality that suggested that even being able to vote should be tied to military service, that people should have to earn the right to vote. These rights were not won in the first place, without an enormous struggle. Like, just as a look up for things that you some facts that you might not know about women's suffrage and the women's suffrage movement. But the year that the women's suffrage movement began in, I gotta get it. It was literally in July in 1848. This movement took all the way to 1917 to get itself, you know, and to get what it needed through the system. You know, this was a struggle that certain women had spent, their whole lives advocating and fighting for, only to end up, you know, dead before they were ever even managed to see the world that they had fought for. They did not actually get what they had been fighting for and calling for. Many of them, and a new generation had to take in and fill in the shoes that their mothers had fought for, you know, and their ancestors had fought for, and so I consider myself something of an ally of the feminist movement, if not entirely perfect in, my positions and the ways that I think about things. And I think, I know that my mentality has kind of gotten some pushback when it comes to feminism, but I really very strongly do feel like, the answers from men are much better answered by feminism than they actually are by, you know, this MGTOW movement. I really do. I think there are better answers for what are the problems that plague men are through the feminist vehicle, to be entirely honest with you and forthcoming. And so it's things like grappling with the realization that the roots of the male suicide crisis may lie in what they refer to as toxic masculinity, and finding a way to really talk about toxic masculinity without having to use those terms. And, as a poet, it kind of is somewhat my role to dream up a different way to refer to toxic masculinity, but by the terminology, at hand. And I would I would suggest that I call it the culture of death worship that I find myself ensconced in as a man, that surrounds me. I find that you can see the culture of death and its adherents when they make fun of a man just for trying to suit up and wear personal protective equipment at a very dangerous job where there's the toxic dust particles flowing around at the place, and call him a sissy just for putting on a mask on. You can see this climate and culture of death worship in a lot of things. That's one of the most striking to me. You can see it in the policing, though, of men, and calling them those kinds of nasty names just because of the fact that they did one thing to try to save their lives, and then the fact that these guys that are taking these risks by deliberately breathing in that shit as if it proves what a real man they are, that they are really hurting their families, and the people that care about them and their loved ones. They've forgotten that they have, families of their own and people and loved ones and people that they care for at home and everything. And it's toxic for exactly that reason, and for the fact that they're making fun of these guys that just do what any sane, normal human being should do. There's nothing wrong with wearing personal protective equipment. It's insane. Nobody needs to flex macho about that crap. It's just deranged. A lot of what passes for the macho culture is just sickening in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with bodybuilding and exercising. I should probably do more of it myself, but start going on walks at the very least. But I just, and I'm not. This isn't really about exercise that I'm going on about, but I find that a lot of what goes on in that kind of community and in the macho space ends up, being a very like eye rolling sort of thing, and it's just utterly because of the toxicity that you end up seeing in that area. If you haven't by now figured out what the point of all of this is, ultimately, I am I consider myself a feminist, and you can see my feminism in things like me pointing out, that it really sucks how things actually are in America, modern America. A few weeks ago, I got into this discussion with somebody, you know, and I was talking to them about things from, a very feminist lens myself. And, I was going on about how I've noticed that in American society that, women's rights are constantly, it seems, up for debate, and people are constantly debating them. And, you know, abortion, was literally on the ballot in 2016, and you know, a lot of people failed to use their ballot to actually protect it. And I did my best by voting for Hillary. But I had problems with Hillary Clinton. A lot of them, I was really not fond of her, but I put my hostilities aside because of the fact that I felt that there were bigger issues at hand, and how the election of Donald Trump would end up impacting women. And I just didn't want the blood and personal responsibilities on my hands that women would hold me to if I were a Trump voter, or even somebody that didn't show up to ultimately vote for Hillary. I'm not, in having done that, though, trying to, you know, I guess, get cookies by doing it. I don't want to face the consequences of having not done it, you know? So, but yeah, I've noticed that this keeps coming up, and it keeps coming up in every election cycle. It's always a thing, and it gets me thinking that, feminists will say that women don't need men, but I kind of beg to digress, and I beg to digress on the grounds that, not every woman has been really good themselves at advancing the cause, at supporting her sisters. I find that a lot of the feminism that the trans exclusionary people face, it's like they hate trans people more than they actually love their fellow woman. I mean, I've noticed that about the gender criticals, like the way that they don't even think things through enough to realize that if we define womanhood as having a womb, that not every woman even has one. Even if they were born, with XX, I find, that that they get into these debates, these women that have had theirs taken out and everything, you know, surgically because of cancer, or because of any other, complications from like hormone related issues that ran havoc on their system and their body, and all. all up and down, the potential causes of that sort of thing. And, it's like, are those people not real women to these gender criticals? Because your definition of woman is one that not even everyone that I'd consider a woman had, basically lived up to, or the ability to live up to. And, I am a bit tired, you guys, and saying this stuff, or you girls, and saying my piece about all these things and what I'm trying to go for. I'm kind of just not. Well, anyways, like it just, the the frustration that I feel too when trying to get through to some of these guys. Like I get it. I have found that educating men can sometimes be like trying to talk to a brick wall that very much so disagrees with you, and because he doesn't want to actually hear what you have to say, or actually understand it. And if he does, he'll respond in a with straw man fallacy by weakening your argument in such a way that it ultimately serves him. But I'm not really ultimately a member of the men's rights movement at this point. I'm not a I'm not a big supporter of it. Every so often, a FERMRA will put forward a video that's definitely appreciated, what she's saying, but you know, it's not. I don't mean to like endorse everything that they put forward either. And what I want to say about that, you know, I'm not a big enemy of like Roma. For instance, as in her channel, like the Roma Army people, I'm not. I think that she says some things that need to be said. Every so often. But yeah, I mean, I am rhetorically definitely in support of your right to vote, and I'm horrified by it. I'm also sort of angry, I guess you could say. And I mean, I know that I'm describing this in a very soft tone of voice too, but the did you know ultimately that I'm a big fan of Dr. Fern Rendell, who educated me about a woman named Kitty Marion, who brought her forward. She's a historian that has a PhD in history, and the work that she's doing is of particular interest to me, and that the British Museum is still going through. The museums over there are still going through the bombs and all the terrorist like bombings and everything from the arson and terrorist campaign and everything that was going on. The women's suffrage movement was very long. Like we've only been exposed as people to like a very little amount of it. A lot of what people were taught in school was bullshit. All of it, quite a bit of it, the Mary Poppins-esque version of women's history is just not accurate. The women's suffrage movement was like basically one of the, you know, largest, potentially the largest homegrown terrorist, you know, organizations and movements in England's and British history. I mean, there's been a huge, and the reason why this pisses me off is that I'm a student, a lifelong student, but I've had issues with consistency and learning. And in order to keep me interested in certain things, sometimes you have to spice things up. And so this whitewashed version of women's history where they were just given the right to vote, it's not that interesting, to say the least. And it's like you guys would have had me left in a state of just having lost interest in it after a while. But Kitty Marion, like, really, and her story just inflamed the passion that I had for learning women's history. I know that it got so bad that women were thrown in prison at some point, that they were locked up as a result of it. There were clashes with the police. They had to, in the prisons. They went on hunger strikes. They were force fed at various points. I mean, it's just it was an absolutely brutal struggle, and women were never given anything. They had to fight for it tooth and nail to actually achieve it in the first place, and it's like, we have come too far and fought for too much historically to allow these rights to ever be taken from them, and I I myself and I remember that I digressed, that I was talking about this issue, though, when it came to, the need for us to vote, but see, not every woman that's out there has been really good at it. I mean, look at women like, um, the transformed wife, you know? Do you really feel like she's doing a great job of supporting her fellow woman? There are a lot of people that could be almost described as, like, female misogynists who just hate other women and think that they're so much better than all of them, and try to go about prancing about and showing us how much better they are than the rest of them, and it's just that. It's because of them that you need men. If you're ever gonna be able to defend, ultimately, abortion rights or get them back, you're going to need some of us to cancel out the votes of women like that. Anyways, I've made my point here, as they say over in Japan, Oyasumi nasai, you know, good night.